Soulless by Madeline Brown. Prologue. Eris. What are you reading? That terse voice yanked me out of my stupor. The constant clacks of the train's wheels were as soothing as I had hoped. I might have even been falling asleep. Glancing first at the boy on the other side of the narrow cabin, stood against the wall, then down at my knees, I cleared my throat, stalling. I gently turned the cover of the book over to be sure. The Definitive Compendium of Espritian Myths, Volume 1 of 3. Raised eyebrows informed me that, frankly, he did not share any interest in fiction. He huffed through his nose, and his narrowed eyes flicked away from my hands in favour of the window. They flared amber under the morning sunlight, eerily. An image scratched against the underside of my memory, a flicker of dark hair and shining irises wrapped in a cloak of flames, summoned then by terror I could not find in him now. Opening the pages back up in front of me, I began to wonder if a copy of The Souls and Those Who Wield Them might have been a better choice. I knew the book like a warm acquaintance, having already rifled through it, filling the margins with penciled scrawls. It still felt different, somewhere, knowing now that I was one of them. One of those. The fascinated detachment swiftly evaporated. There was a soul concealed inside me, and I intended to use it to devour the very thing that had wrenched it to the surface. A part of me believed that to spend time reading up on that was the very least I could do. The very notion grew more laughable the more times I turned it over in my mind. But then I'd already considered this earlier today, under the shelter of the library, balancing precariously on the steps of one of our old rolling ladders. White light was just breaking through the high windows, lifting the gentle veil of dimness from the morning, and allowing jagged shadows to creep out from between the shelves, cases, and stairways. Their slow crawl along the floor eventually caught my attention and worked sufficiently to intimidate me down from my perch. Maud still waited, more patiently than usual for me. Such tolerance for my habitual dithering was odd, and this particular situation I perhaps would have appreciated her typical ruthlessness more. Maud, the old librarian, was by all accounts fastidious and irritable. Nevertheless, she who once lived alone and perfectly content, she would add, had readily allowed me a place in her musty, heavenly sanctuary. There was much to be said for that. She also possessed a certain air of superior wisdom that I'd never thought to question. A mutual understanding hung between the pair of us like steadfast clockwork that sustained us. I could not say how long it took exactly. Was it a year, or perchance more? One hardly noticed the steady process occur, but after that strange, indistinct length of time I had successfully become another piece of the furniture in that antique place. But never quite like Maud herself. That was unattainable. Rather fittingly, she was stationed vigil at her oaken desk when I first left, to post to my mother and father, using the new address they included in the last lengthy letter, as they did with each and every one. On occasion my reply covered the ground too slow, and found that they had already moved on. Strict instruction dictated I was not to attach my own location, so I could only assume they left a faint trail of lost messages behind them, with no place to return to. I'd pondered over this one for several days, wondering whether or not it was fair to tell them where I was going, before I remembered the likelihood that the envelope would never reach them anyway. The letter represented, more than anything, one attempt to maintain a semblance of routine. I returned home in a fraction of the time it had taken me to write the thing, and Maud was there, behind her desk. For whatever reason, she didn't so much as glance over her shoulder at me as I went to linger listlessly in front of our collection, simply labelled Souls. I'd been there before. All of these covers were marked with my fingerprints. Any question I could think of on that spot I already had an answer to anyway. Why me? No reason. The distribution of souls is entirely random, and you're not superstitious. Why then? You were in danger, obviously. Your soul protected you. You should consider yourself lucky. So why does that equate to me shipping myself off to interior with what stragglers remain of the military? You offered yourself up for this. You didn't have to. That was made abundantly clear. Still, here you are with no particular reasoning. Only the awareness of some vague, reconciled feeling that there really was no choice. You're going to kill a monster. I eventually arrived at what would have happened to me if my soul had not surfaced. What if vicious white light had not splintered the air as it shielded my useless body? What if he had not been there too? What if Kai Hughes's soul had not emerged in an angry, terrified plume of flames that had, for now, banished the furious beast? I had considered this idea only briefly before I decided to stop thinking about it. In the end, I concluded that reading anything to take my mind away from what if, even for a moment, was the safer idea. Perhaps I had grasped the wrong end of this particularly thorny stick, and a romance would have worked more efficiently, something sticky and tooth-rotting from the back end of the library. I shifted a little in my seat, stirring up an aroma from the worn upholstery. Aged, almost like home. In reality, I was just barely gone. The train had yet to even cross the border out of the Western District, but it served as a small comfort all the same. Another familiar occurrence slouched over the cover of yesterday's newspaper in brash black print, folded up and abandoned in the cabin. Altair's Siege of the South Begins could be deciphered from where I sat. Looking at it, I had felt I had read that particular headline before. I did not doubt the writers had exhausted their supply. News was, these days, frustrating but never surprising. They'd moved on to the Southern District. Only a matter of time before it would be the West's turn to live with the tired anxiety they brought. That could either take months, or only a matter of weeks. Whoever knew? Neither of us touched the paper. Perhaps the Altairs should have played more upon my mind. In ordinary circumstances they surely would. The doors of the carriage clattered open about 2 hours later. My travel partner had fidgeted a little over the journey, sitting down, standing up again, leaning on the window, then the cabin door. His outburst had come a relatively short while after departure, and he'd not said a word since. Our fellow passengers piled off the train as though each one of them had somewhere they were in a desperate hurry to be. I let all of them go ahead, with him behind me, presumably to his chagrin, because I heard him sigh again through his nostrils. Mindful of the gap between myself and the platform, I hopped out, noticing first the blinding white fog which seemed to swamp my senses. Next were two faces that appeared amongst it. They both must have trodden lightly, the way they appeared to float through the mist, so lightly in fact that I almost collided with a shoulder. Looking up, I didn't recognize him. His female companion, however, was very familiar to me. My thoughts were faint and wispy at the time, back in the little street near the library. My recollection of them by this point distorted at best. Nonetheless, 3 distinct memories managed to stick. These were the same visions as came creeping to visit whenever I might deign to sleep. Foremost was the image of that dark, vicious fiend, all shadow and snarl and teeth and wrath, bathed in lightning and fire. Hours I had to remember. Second came Kai Hughes's eyes. They were framed by unruly feathers of hair and glazed over in such a way that they seemed to glow red, as if the flames that had burst from the ground at his feet now burned inside his skull. His pupils glanced first over his shoulder, lazily following the fleeing silhouette, before turning back to stare right into my own. The rest of his body remained inert, slumped on the cobbles. He'd been knocked to his knees by the blast, and there he stayed. Some time after that, a girl's voice, soft in my ears, repeating to me over and over, "Hey, sweetie, listen, it's okay. See, it's gone. You got it. It's not here. It's not here. Hey, you are okay. You're going to be okay. Hey." It was her airy chant that I recognised initially, before I was then able to place her tumbling black hair and small delicate features as well. I remembered thinking back then that she was so very pretty. She was quick to speak up. "Ah, hey, there you are. Eris, Kai, it's me. It's Aria. I'm here to meet you, remember?" She rested one hand on my forearm, the other on Kai's, and gasped loudly. In her enthusiasm, she had forgotten herself. "Oh, but I am sorry about this, but we can't stay here. Tang and Medi are herding up the passengers already, so we have to grab you two and go, speedy as we can. We will try explaining to you on the way, all right?" "Come on, we have to go." The young man at Aria's side spoke, already turning to leave, and I noticed Kai had disappeared from my left as well. Aria gave my wrist a gentle tug to spur me into motion. We were only walking, albeit at an urgent pace, but the ringing sensation in my rib cage and sand at the roof of my mouth more closely resembled wading against a current. I felt the nerves in my feet had shut down. My shoes logically had to be hitting the concrete, but I could scarcely feel it. We were stopped on our way over here. There was an unnamed threat detected entering over the border into the city. In such situations as this one, Aria and, by extension, myself are under orders from General to act as your escorts, per se. The man continued, raising his voice firmly above the clamour, the sea of footsteps and implacable shouting made worse by the incessant toll of a bell somewhere outside. "Eris, Kai, meet Emery. He serves under General Elwyn too," added Aria with a smile, first to us, then shooting another in his direction. This seemed to catch his attention, and he twisted himself to face us, although still marching ahead. His dull blonde ponytail flipped over his shoulder, and he volunteered a lopsided smirk of his own, raising his hand in a half-wave. "You said this threat is unnamed. Tell me exactly what you mean by that." Kai's low drone almost went unnoticed by me. He hadn't spoken in so long. I was hardly one to talk, I soon recalled. "What I mean is we don't recognise it. Whatever it is, it's not human or animal," Emery elaborated. The realisation dawned on me. "So what you're saying is this means you've barely been here 5 minutes, and we've probably got the bastard in our sights already." "Oh, well, that's typical. I gear myself up for this, enough crap to last for weeks, and chances are I'll be back on that train by tomorrow," Kai snapped. "Gracious almighty, I apologise for your inconvenience," I said, out loud apparently, although I didn't quite register that until Aria's head whipped around, brow arched at me, presumably in alarm. They led us out of the station and accelerated to the fastest walk my legs could imagine. Aria kept reaching round and pulling me along a little, as though to check I was still in fact there and had not absconded. Where she thought I might disappear to was truthfully beyond me. They continued making sudden turns or diving down narrow, dim side streets, which I would ordinarily choose to avoid like a disease. It was clear they knew where we were going, and precisely how they would drag us there. All these roads and buildings looked the same to me. I could be anywhere, and I wouldn't be able to distinguish it from any other place in this brick wilderness. I was placing my trust, my protection, in the hands of these strangers, like yanking up my heart only to hold it up on a spattered silver dish in hope. Now there was a paradox. But there was something else, something off about the whole journey. It escaped me at first, while the situation offered my mind little room to hang back. But upon later reflection I grasped it. There was no strange presence that I'd failed to pin down, but rather an absence. Every door we happened to pass was sealed shut, each street empty save for us four. Interior, the bustling capital had been deserted.